What is privacy? Let's talk through the basics together. My name is John Bandler. This is one of my tougher videos thus far because privacy is not a simple subject. I'll give you some simple nuggets you can remember. I'll also help you understand the broader concepts, but privacy, it's complicated. Now, originally this video was going to be called What is Privacy and Privacy Law? I cut it into two. You'll see why. But we can't talk about privacy without at least mentioning privacy law. And in that infographic on the right, you see my thinking of how privacy law is a subset of data law. We'll talk about that a little bit to introduce it in this video. I have a separate video on data law as well. Those two gentlemen are credited with being the modern legal founders of privacy. They were lawyers, so that's a law tie-in already. Fellow on the left, that is Louis D. Brandeis. He would go on to become a U.S. Supreme Court Justice, so he was pretty famous. The gentleman on his right, that's Samuel D. Warren. So those two co-authored an article about privacy. I'll talk about that in a little bit. Let's put privacy in perspective. And remember how I wrote this book on Cyberlaw? That's the book. Now, I tabbed it because I teach with it. So each of the parts I tabbed, I know you like that bracelet too. In that book, I have a chapter devoted to privacy. That's chapter 32. And that's what this video parallels. But there are also other chapters on important areas leading up to privacy. For example, chapter 14, I talk about cybercrime and identity theft because criminals want to steal our data. And our data is held by a lot of companies. And cyber criminals want to breach that data and use it because the data is valuable for cyber criminals. Another important lead-up chapter is chapter 15. Because it's not just the criminals that want our data, private companies want it too. They make money from it. That includes social media companies, tech companies, data brokers. Almost every company that sells goods or services wants to know about us. Data about you and me, it's important for digital advertising and marketing, and that's the ecosystem we're in now. Now, I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying that's what it is. Have you heard this phrase? If the service is free, you are the product. We get a lot of things on the internet for free. It could be said that we are not getting a service, but we are the product being provided to others. I like YouTube. You like YouTube. It's awesome in many ways. I don't pay a penny for it. You probably don't either. I don't get a penny from it either. But YouTube and Google are getting a pretty penny. Billions of dollars worth. I'm not saying that's good. I'm not saying it's bad. We're all getting something for free. It makes sense. They need to monetize it somehow. And so are other companies and people. And that's part of this complex world of digital advertising and monetization. Just because you pay for something doesn't mean they're not monetizing your data either. So you may be paying for internet service or cell phone service. That doesn't mean you're not the product for them either. So that's the lead up. Now think chapter 32. That's privacy and privacy laws. And we've had concerns about privacy since the first humans. But now with cybercrime and digital advertising and more, we need to think more about privacy as a concept. We need to think about privacy laws too. But I also want to put this thought in your brain too. If you think that you being monetized is awkward, unsettling, or even creepy, that it's a lot to think about and worry about, I get it. That's why privacy is important. And I hope you'll keep watching and like and subscribe. But that's not all, because it gets a little more concerning. There's even more to it than that. This is also about influencing you, and I don't mean necessarily in the sense of a influencer, a social media influencer, but I mean about what cyberspace can do to influence you, what you think about, your opinions, what you buy and other actions. And that's chapter 36 in my book. It's part 8, Speech, Expression, and Thought in Cyberspace and in Our Brains, because cyber is powerful. So that's chapter 36. Maybe I'll do a video on that someday for YouTube, but it's in my book and my Udemy course. Data about us has value to others for commercial monetization, monetizing our personal data. It's bought and sold directly, but also indirectly, because information about us is how they target us for advertising and other things. So most governments realized some legal protections were needed, and that's protections on how businesses collect, store, sell, share, and use that information, and also what they tell consumers about that. So many governments started to put into laws these privacy laws with principles of transparency, choice, and consent. Normally in these videos, I try to give you a really simple takeaway and definition of what something is, and I lead with it early in the video, but it's hard to do here. Privacy means different things to different people. Evolving laws are defining it, so let me try. And one way to start is by saying privacy is the right to be left alone. You could also say it's sort of like recognizing people saying, leave me alone. But in this data age, it's more like saying, leave my data alone. Let's be realistic. They have your data. A lot of companies need your data or have to get your data to do business with you. A more realistic way to phrase this is, tell me what you are doing with my data. And the idea is give consumers rights about their data, the data that's held by companies. A lot of times when we talk about privacy, we mean privacy from private companies. And a good place to look when we're trying to define something is to the laws, especially with privacy laws, because they define privacy rights and they define privacy obligations. Privacy's origins, we could say privacy has existed since the earliest humans. It's definitely been around a long time. Imagine ancestral cave dwellers or wherever early humans were living. They were protective of their homes. 1300s England, they had peeping Tom laws. You could say that's a privacy protection. Then we think of these gentlemen, Louis Brandeis and Samuel Warren II. 1890, they wrote a law review article titled The Right to Privacy. And they suggested there should be an individual right to privacy that includes the right to be left alone. Now, that's not law. It's an article. It's the opinion of two lawyers, but it became very persuasive. And they actually worded it the right to be let alone. But I like left alone better. And just running through some privacy concepts, it's important. I don't care who you are. It's important for every person, every organization. We've got privacy threats. Criminals want to steal data, a data breach. Companies misuse it. Now, there are ethical companies, there's unethical companies, there's some companies who commit crimes. Some companies overshare or they violate their privacy promises. There's very well publicized incidents of companies being held to account at least a little bit when they got caught. Lots of laws and regulations on privacy. We want to be aware of privacy. We want to teach it for our family. And when we are thinking about our own privacy or our family's privacy, that goes nicely with cybersecurity. Organizations, you could argue, we would hope that good privacy practices is good for business. Hopefully people will be more inclined to use that tech company that respects privacy and will be reluctant to patronize or use the tech company that doesn't care about our privacy. Here are some things we can remember. Nice nuggets to memorize. 4 main areas of privacy. Information privacy, also known as data privacy, communications privacy, territorial privacy, bodily privacy. And you can imagine different circumstances where each might be more important than the other. Just consider today when everything is reduced to data, everything is stored as data, all of these become a part of data privacy. What we communicate is held in data. Where we are, where we go, how we travel is in data, and things about our body are also in data, especially if you're using a health tracker or something else that tracks information about your body. Now here's a more robust definition, and it's respected because it's from the International Association of Privacy Professionals, IAPP. They're a nonprofit organization devoted to, you guessed it, privacy. And I hold one of their certifications in privacy. This is how they define privacy. A nebulous philosophical, legal, social, and technological concept which means different things to different observers. In an influential 1890 Harvard Law Review article, Samuel Warren and Louis Brandeis, who later became a Supreme Court justice, famously defined privacy as a right to be let alone. Common areas of privacy that are of particular interest with regard to data protection and privacy laws include information privacy, bodily privacy, territorial privacy, and communications privacy. And there's my cite from the IAPP glossary. Here's the individual's perspective on thinking privacy and cybersecurity. And there's my graphic of a human. You can tell I do not use AI tools. So this bubble in this Venn diagram is privacy, and this bubble is cybersecurity. And they closely overlap for the individual because when you're working on cybersecurity and privacy, a lot of times you can do them together. You want to go to Google and check your privacy and security settings? They're together. And what you decide to share with the world also impacts your cybersecurity. So that's how I think of it for an individual. Now, for an organization, the perspective's a little different. There's my diagram there. That took a bit more work. So there's privacy, and an organization probably needs a privacy program, and a huge organization like Google and YouTube, they've got an enormous privacy team with lots of attorneys and other people working on their privacy program. An organization also needs a cybersecurity program. Now, there's overlap, but it's not as much overlap as with the individual. So the privacy program has to comply with privacy laws and regulations. It has to protect and secure consumer data from a breach. It has to secure it. And then cybersecurity is about protecting the entire organization from cybercrime, protecting all data, including consumer data. So that's how I think of it. Still an overlap, but not as much as for an individual. Many organizations need to have a solid privacy program. That's going to include a privacy policy and a privacy notice. And a privacy law might require that. Best practices may suggest that organizations give consumers notice about their privacy practices. And that might be called a privacy notice. It might be called a privacy policy. And if an organization makes their privacy policy public, then it's really a notice also. These privacy policies are things we have to agree to and accept as a condition of using the service. Think of it as coming under the umbrella of the terms of service that we have to agree to. I'm going to use YouTube and Google as an example since we're all on their site now. I've spent hundreds of hours watching videos on YouTube, and you probably have too. Now, they've invested a lot in their privacy program. I'm not saying it's perfect, but it starts with this terms of service because these are the terms we agree to, including the privacy policy. And whether you know it or not, you've agreed to these, and you continue to agree to them by using the service. YouTube has this landing page on privacy, and it leads to a lot of links. They're not calling it a privacy notice, but it is giving us notice of how they do privacy. Here's more information through the Help Center of Google about privacy on YouTube. Here is Google's privacy and terms, and obviously YouTube is a part of Google. And here is more information on their privacy practices. They put out a lot of information. They've put a lot of thought in it, and I'm not endorsing them or promoting them, but they're probably doing a lot better with our privacy than many other social media companies. LinkedIn has a privacy policy. If you're on LinkedIn, you've agreed to it and you're continuing to agree to it. And Facebook or Meta, they have a privacy policy too. If you have an account there, you've agreed to that too. There are laws regarding privacy, and to think about what privacy is, we need to think a little bit about laws or what they might mean. The laws define consumer privacy rights, and they impose obligations on companies about consumer data. Don't let the word law give you fear. It's important that we all know something about law, and I'll introduce it just a little bit in this video, and we'll dive deeper into privacy laws in another video. So privacy law is mostly part of Cyberlaw. And if you see my other videos, this is how I break it down. Cyberlaw is a subset of all law. Yeah, I'll mention again, I wrote a book on Cyberlaw, so I've covered it in depth. And I've got a book on regular law coming. So let's think about just regular law. We can break it into criminal law and civil law. We can put Cyberlaw within it. What we're really talking about is the civil data law that fits in there. And that part of data law that's really important for us is, you guessed it, privacy law. Privacy law has some subcomponents in it. There's cybersecurity law, secure data disposal law, which is really just a part of cybersecurity law. And there's data breach notification laws. But I think of all of them as being part of privacy law. Now, laws are mandatory. Privacy frameworks are not laws. They're optional. They're not mandatory. They're optional guidance. And one well-done privacy framework is from NIST. And NIST is the National Institute of Standards and Technology. They came out with the privacy framework. I came out with an article to summarize it. That's on my website. I'll put a link in the description. We'll talk more in the next video on privacy law too. I just want to ease you into a couple more details on privacy laws. In the US, our privacy laws are what's called a patchwork. They also call it the sectoral model, meaning sector by sector. And it's confusing, I'm not going to lie. So some laws are state, some are federal, some are general, some are specific to a sector. In contrast, the European Union has what's called a comprehensive privacy law, their GDPR, which is the General Data Protection Regulation. But here in the US, we're the patchwork, the sectoral model. So our privacy laws, think of the FTC Act, the Federal Trade Commission Act, which doesn't even mention privacy in it, but it prohibits unfair or deceptive trade practices. There are federal privacy laws for certain sectors, such as health, finance, education, credit, and telemarketing, and we have state privacy laws. California led the way. Other states have them too. Connecticut, Colorado, Virginia, more. California's is the most detailed, the most strict. I want to briefly mention privacy from government, and that's not really the focus of this video, because the way I think of it, privacy protections from government come mostly from the Fourth Amendment and constitutional law. I cover that in chapter 11 of my book. The Fourth Amendment is the prohibition against unreasonable searches and seizures by the government. We can also look to the Electronic Communications Privacy Act, which in my viewing falls under the Fourth Amendment. I cover that in chapter 21 of my book. And also there's something called the Federal Privacy Act of 1974, which has been amended over the years. And that is the basics of privacy. So let me give you some important takeaways. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Privacy is a long-standing concept. There are new concerns and laws for data privacy in our cyber age. One concept is that privacy is the right to be left alone. Privacy law is a part of data law. There are 4 types of privacy: information or data privacy, communications privacy, territorial privacy, bodily privacy. Consumer data is valuable for businesses, Whether that business is ethical or unethical, that data is valuable for criminals too. And privacy laws give us consumers privacy rights. For a deeper understanding, see my additional resources. They're in the description and on this next slide. Don't forget my book on Cyberlaw. And thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and like. And all of these references will be in the description. And I got a main article on privacy on my webpage, johnbandler.com. Thanks so much for watching and listening.